Brooklyn woke before the sun, and so did Emma Matthews. The alarm on her cracked phone vibrated more than it rang. A faint protest drowned beneath the distant rumble of early trucks and the hiss of steam from the old building's pipes. She opened her eyes into the gray half-light of the tiny bedroom she shared with two other women, the smell of reheated takeout still lingering in the air. For a few seconds, she lay still, letting exhaustion press down on her chest like a physical weight. She had barely slept 3 hours. Again. But there was no room in her life for softness, not even for the simple luxury of lying in bed. She forced herself upright. Her muscles protested her back aching from bending over office desks the day before. In the corner, a pile of textbooks waited like silent reminders of the life she was trying to build. Business administration, strategic management, accounting, the language of the world she wanted to enter but had never been invited into. She stretched quietly and tiptoed out to the hallway so she wouldn't wake Jessica, who had a morning shift at the hospital. The apartment was dark except for the faint glow of the street lamp filtering through the blinds. Brooklyn mornings always smelled like burnt coffee, car exhaust, and possibility a strange combination, but one Emma had learned to find comfort in. In the kitchen, she brewed the cheapest brand of coffee she could afford. Bitter, watery, but hot. She cupped the mug in both hands, letting the warmth seep into her fingers while staring blankly at the cluttered countertops. In the reflection of the microwave door, she saw herself 25. Black, tired in a way makeup couldn't hide, but with a fire in her eyes she refused to let die. She whispered to her own reflection, something she often did when no one else was awake. "We're not giving up. Not today." Her roommates emerged one by one, exchanging quick greetings before rushing out the door. Life in their little apartment ran like a conveyor belt. Someone always leaving for work, someone always coming back exhausted. Emma packed her cleaning supplies into her faded tote bag and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The sun was finally rising, casting long shadows across the worn steps of their building. Brooklyn wasn't glamorous, but it was home loud, chaotic and brimming with people who, like her, were quietly waging their own battles. The subway ride to Midtown was the same as every day, crowded, humid, a sea of weary faces and restless feet. Emma stood pressed between a man loudly typing on his laptop and a woman in a beige coat that smelled like expensive perfume. The woman did not look at her. Most people didn't. Emma had grown used to being unseen, blending into the background of a city too busy to acknowledge the people holding it together. Her first shift began at 7 a.m. Sharp. The office building lobby gleamed with polished marble, reflecting a world she didn't belong to. Executives would arrive hours later, gliding across the floor, without ever knowing Emma had wiped every surface, emptied, every bin restored, every space to perfection. Her supervisor, Miguel, gave her a sympathetic nod as she entered. "Morning, mija." "Long night." "Always," she replied with a tired smile. Cleaning was repetitive, meditative almost, but sometimes her thoughts became too loud in the silence. She thought of boardrooms where decisions were made by people who would never know her name. She wondered what it felt like to live without worrying about rent or transit fare, or whether she had enough money left in her account to buy real groceries instead of instant noodles. She wondered if she'd ever step into an office as something more than the invisible girl with a mop, maybe as a consultant, a strategist, someone finally seen. By the time she clocked out at 11 a.m., her back throbbed, her stomach growled, and her day was still far from over. Her second job, barista, was slightly better. The East Village coffee shop had mismatched furniture and indie music playing non-stop, which somehow made the overpriced drinks seem intentional. Emma tied her apron and stepped behind the counter. The noise the orders shouted over blenders, the steady hiss of steaming milk, everything washed over her. She moved on instinct, fast and competent. Some customers were kind. Most were indifferent. A few looked at her like she was part of the decor. When a young financier in a navy suit snapped at her because she misheard his order, she apologized with a practice-polished smile. Inside, the humiliation stung. But she swallowed it. She always did. During her 15-minute break, she perched on a crate in the alley behind the cafe and opened her textbook, highlighting paragraphs even though her vision blurred from fatigue. She loved learning, loved the idea that knowledge might be her lifeline out of this grind. But every page reminded her how far she still had to go. Her third job at the restaurant in Williamsburg was the hardest. Dinner service meant chaos, demanding customers spilled drinks, the pressure to stay friendly, no matter how rudely she was treated. Once a woman yelled at her for bringing the wrong dressing, even though the kitchen had made the mistake. Emma apologized until her cheeks burned. Later in the bathroom, she cried silently for 30 seconds before washing her face and returning with a forced smile. That night, she returned home close to midnight, her feet aching so badly she could barely stand. The apartment was quiet. She sat at the small dining table, opened her laptop, and stared at her online assignment. Her mind drifted. Was this how the rest of her life would feel? Running, surviving, but never arriving anywhere. She rubbed her temples and whispered again, "Don't quit. You're almost there." Her phone buzzed. A text from Madison. "Got a job for you tomorrow night. Special event. $300. Interested?" Emma froze. $300. It was more than she made in 2 weeks at the cafe, more than her half-month rent, more than she ever saw in her checking account. She typed back, "What's the catch?" Madison replied instantly, "No catch. Fancy gala in Manhattan. Just serving drinks. Easy money." Emma's heart pounded. Fancy. Manhattan. Gala. Those 3 words did not belong in her life. She imagined crystal chandeliers, wealthy guests, dripping diamonds, conversations about vacations in Paris, and stock portfolios. People who would look at her like she was nothing. Or worse, like she did not exist at all. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. She desperately needed the money. But the thought of stepping into a world built to remind her of everything she didn't have, it terrified her. She typed slowly, "I don't have the right clothes. Wear black. You'll blend in. Trust me. I'm scared I'll mess up." "Emma, you survive 3 jobs a day. You can carry a tray." Emma leaned back in her chair, staring at the cracked ceiling. She could almost hear that world whispering at her. "You don't belong here. Stay where you are. Stay small. Stay invisible." But another voice, quieter, but braver, rose within her. What if this is the moment everything changes? She needed that money. Badly. But there was something else, too. A flicker of curiosity, of defiance even. What if she stepped into that world not as the girl who didn't belong, but as the girl determined to break through? Her pulse raced. She typed the message before she lost courage. "Okay. I'll do it." Minutes later, as she prepared for bed, a strange feeling settled over her. Like the air had shifted. Like somewhere just beyond the horizon, a door she had never seen before was creaking open. For the first time in months, she didn't fall asleep thinking about exhaustion or overdue bills. She fell asleep wondering, terrified and hopeful at once, what awaited her the next night. A gala. A world of wealth and power. A chance to earn enough to breathe for once. She had no idea that stepping into that penthouse would not just change her finances. It would change the course of her entire life. Emma spent the next 24 hours moving through her routine in a kind of dazed autopilot, as if her body kept working while her mind kept circling the same thought tonight. Every time she tried to imagine what a Manhattan Gala actually looked like, her stomach twisted, not just from fear, but from something sharper. Anticipation, maybe, or the sense that she was about to step onto a path she didn't understand yet. When her last shift ended, she hurried home to get ready, rushing up the stairs to the tiny apartment, the hallway echoing with her uneven breaths. She didn't tell her roommates what she was doing. She didn't want to explain that she was terrified of serving drinks in a room full of millionaires. She didn't want to hear them say she was overthinking, because maybe she was, but maybe she wasn't. She stood in the bathroom staring at herself in the mirror, skin glowing with natural warmth, curls pinned back neatly, black blouse, pressed as best as she could manage. Everything about her was simple but careful. She looked like someone trying very hard to look like she belonged. The thought made her chest tighten. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her collar. "You've handled worse," she whispered, though part of her wasn't sure it was true. Being invisible among regular people was one thing. Being invisible among the wealthy felt like something else entirely, more dangerous somehow, a reminder of the distance between her reality and theirs. The subway ride to the Upper East Side felt like moving between parallel universes. One moment she was surrounded by chipped tiles and worn seats. The next, she climbed the station steps and emerged into streets that gleamed under golden street lamps. Everything was cleaner here. The air, the sidewalks, even the silence. Buildings stood tall, like they were built for a different species of human. Sleek cars glided past with tinted windows hiding lives Emma couldn't fathom. She hugged her arms around herself, feeling suddenly too small, too exposed. She kept walking anyway, guided by the address Madison had sent, 847 Park. She said it under her breath, as if the number might slip away from her if she didn't hold on to it. When she reached the skyscraper, she froze. It was taller than she expected, sleek glass framed with polished stone, a glowing lobby visible through the massive windows. People walked in wearing gowns that swayed like liquid light. Men in tailored suits moved with effortless confidence. Emma felt like she had accidentally wandered onto a movie set. She hovered on the sidewalk for a beat too long, wondering if she should turn back. But then, she remembered her bank account balance. She remembered how her hands shook this morning when she bought groceries and prayed her card wouldn't decline. She forced herself forward. The doorman looked at her with a professional smile that didn't quite mask the flicker in his eyes. Curiosity, judgment. He didn't ask questions, merely pointed her to the service entrance around the back, a reminder of where she belonged in this world. The metal door beeped open when she buzzed in her name. A staff elevator took her up 47 floors in unsettling silence. With each passing number, her nerves twisted tighter. She wondered if the air was thinner up here, or if anxiety had simply stolen her breath. The moment she stepped into the service area, chaos swallowed her. People in all black uniforms rushed around with trays, floral arrangements, menus. Emma had never seen so much coordination in such little space. She barely had time to take it in before a stern woman with perfectly styled blonde hair approached Patricia, the event coordinator. Her demeanor was sharp enough to cut glass. She gave Emma instructions that were clear but heavy with subtext. Stay out of the way. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't disrupt the illusion. Emma nodded, remembering the advice Madison had given her. Be invisible. But the harder she tried to make herself small, the bigger the knot in her chest grew. A younger staff member led her to the tray station, helping her balance a silver tray of champagne flutes. Emma tried to steady her breathing. She rehearsed her posture, her smile, her steps. She thought about how one mistake could cost her the entire night's pay. She needed this money. She needed it desperately. But as she stepped toward the main double doors leading into the gala, She wondered if she had underestimated what she was truly stepping into. The doors opened, and she lost her breath. The penthouse was unreal. A panoramic sea of city lights glittered beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. Crystal chandeliers cast diamond-like reflections that danced along marble floors. The room smelled faintly of jasmine and expensive perfume. Music drifted through the air, soft enough not to overpower the low hum of elegant conversations. People moved with an elegance that felt choreographed, their laughter light and practiced. Emma stood at the threshold, like an outsider staring into another dimension, and for a moment, she couldn't move. Then she stepped forward. The first hour passed in a blur. She offered glasses, collected empties, dodged guests who didn't look at her long enough to see her face. She felt the familiar invisibility settle over her, but here it was sharper. The wealthy didn't just overlook her. They looked through her as if she were part of the decor, functional, replaceable, unimportant. At one point, she overheard a woman complain about being exhausted from choosing between 3 vacation homes in Switzerland. Emma kept her face still, but a small part of her clenched. She had skipped breakfast to save money. She didn't resent them. Resentment was too dangerous a poison to carry. But she couldn't help wondering how 2 versions of the world could exist at the same time and still call themselves the same planet. As she moved through the glittering crowd, she felt the weight of her differences more acutely than ever. Her dark skin against waves of pale faces, her modest clothes against couture gowns, her quiet endurance against their inherited ease. The room didn't make her feel inferior. It made her feel unseen. A ghost drifting between people who had more influence in their fingertips than she had in her entire life. When she returned to the kitchen to refill her tray, she overheard Patricia murmuring to another coordinator about new girls who don't know their place. Emma didn't know if it was directed at her, but the words lodged in her chest like a splinter. She didn't want to be trouble. She didn't want to be noticed. She only wanted to do her job, get paid, go home, and maybe for one night believe she was capable of more than this life of constant struggle. And then it happened. It wasn't dramatic. There was no spark, no music shift, no cinematic spotlight. It was just a feeling subtle but electric, like the air changed direction. She was crossing the room with a tray balanced carefully when she felt someone watching her, not glancing, watching. Her heart stuttered. She didn't look right away. Instead, she told herself it was her imagination. But when she finally lifted her gaze, her breath hitched. Across the room stood a man in a tailored dark suit, tall, poised, with a presence so effortlessly commanding that the people around him seemed to orbit him. His hair was neatly styled, his posture relaxed but confident, and his eyes, sharp blue, unreadable, were fixed on her. Not in curiosity, not in judgment, but with a focus she was not used to receiving from anyone, let alone a man who clearly belonged to this world of impossible wealth. Emma looked away instantly, heat rising to her cheeks. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Why was he looking at her? Was she standing wrong? Was her tray crooked? Did she spill something without noticing? Anxiety surged. She moved faster, nearly stumbling when someone brushed past her. She needed to get it together. She couldn't afford a mistake. She told herself that people like him didn't look at girls like her, not for any reason that mattered. But even as she repeated that to herself, she felt his gaze linger. She tried not to look again. She failed. Their eyes met once more, brief but undeniable, and something flickered inside her, something fragile and terrifying. A reminder that beneath all her exhaustion, beneath all the layers of practicality and survival, she was still capable of feeling something dangerous. Curiosity, attraction, hope. She didn't want any of those things. Not tonight. Not in this place. not with a man who represented everything she couldn't touch. But the universe didn't care about her rules, because a minute later, as she turned to slip behind a cluster of guests, her heel caught on the edge of a rug. The tray tilted. She steadied it quickly, but one glass wobbled and nearly fell into the arms of a sharply dressed older woman. Gasps followed. Emma froze in humiliation. She managed to keep everything from crashing, but the woman shot her a glare sharp enough to slice skin. Patricia appeared instantly, her expression icy. "Careful," she murmured with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We cannot afford accidents." Emma nodded, swallowing the shame clawing up her throat. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to go home, but she also needed the money. So she straightened her shoulders and continued, even though her hands shook slightly. The man across the room was still watching, and for the first time in a very long time, Emma realized something unsettling. Maybe being invisible wasn't the safest thing after all, because tonight when someone finally saw her, everything began to change. Emma tried to stay focused on her work, but the air in the penthouse felt different now, charged with something she didn't understand yet. Every time she moved through the glittering maze of guests, she felt the echo of that man's gaze like a warm pulse just at the edge of her awareness. She hated that it affected her. She hated that a stranger could shift the rhythm of her heartbeat with nothing but a look. She tried to convince herself he'd lost interest, that she imagined the intensity from moments before, but some strange pull kept tugging at her attention. She was collecting empty glasses near the terrace when she sensed someone approaching, not physically, but energetically, the way you feel a change in the room before you see the source. She kept her eyes lowered, reminding herself she was here to serve nothing more. But instinct nudged her gaze upward, and he was suddenly there. Up close, he was even more striking. The sharp lines of his jaw softened by the warm glow of the chandeliers, the faint shadow of stubble, the quiet confidence in the way he stood. His eyes, the same eyes that had unsettled her across the room, held something unreadable, something too curious, too aware. He didn't smile. He didn't flirt. He simply watched her like he was trying to understand something about her that she didn't understand herself. It terrified her, and it thrilled her. She lowered her eyes, immediately panic flashing through her chest. This was exactly the type of attention she didn't want. Attention from people like him came wrapped in consequences, and consequences were luxuries she couldn't afford. Her entire life required control of her emotions, of her expressions, of her expectations. Particularly those expectations that led to disappointment, especially those. But just as she stepped aside to let him pass, he spoke softly, calmly, as though he didn't want to startle her. The sound of his voice alone sent a chill up her spine. It wasn't loud or demanding like many men in this room. It was warm, low, self-assured. A voice used to being heard, yet strangely gentle when directed at her. She answered him with the fewest words necessary, keeping her tone neutral, her expression careful, not rude, not inviting, just professional enough to protect herself. But that wasn't what rattled her. What rattled her was the way he listened, really listened, as if her words, simple, functional, were worth remembering. He didn't ask anything inappropriate. He didn't give her that condescending smile she'd seen rich men give waitresses. Instead, he looked at her with a kind of unexpected respect, the kind she rarely received, even from people who knew her name. It was disarming, almost dangerous. When he finally stepped away, she released a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She tried to shake off the encounter, tried to ground herself back into the rhythm of work, but her mind wouldn't let go. His presence lingered like heat after touching sunlight. She didn't know his name. She didn't know why he looked at her like that. But something told her he wasn't just another wealthy guest. Not because he was more handsome than the rest. Not because he carried himself like a man who had built empires, even if he hadn't. No, because for the first time in a very, very long time, someone had looked at her and actually seen her. She wasn't ready for that. She wasn't prepared for the emotional vulnerability it awakened. And vulnerability, she had learned, was a threat when your life was built on survival. She tried to dismiss him as a fleeting moment, a strange spark she would forget by morning. But the universe had other plans. While circulating near the edge of the ballroom, she caught sight of him again, this time speaking with a group of elegantly dressed people. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes flicked toward her in quiet intervals, subtle enough that no one else noticed, but consistent enough that she felt the pull of it each time. She forced herself to avoid looking at him. She couldn't risk drawing attention, not with Patricia prowling around like a hawk. Emma retreated to the kitchen to reset her breathing, leaning on the stainless steel counter for a brief stolen second of calm. She stared at her reflection in the microwave. Door-flushed cheeks, wide eyes, curls slightly loosened from the humidity of bodies, and blurred emotions. "Get it together, Emma," she whispered to herself. "You're here to work, not to—" But she couldn't finish the sentence because she didn't even know what she wasn't supposed to do. Not to notice him, not to feel this shifting under her ribs, not to want something she couldn't name. Her self-scolding was interrupted by a commotion near the hallway. A staffer rushed past her, nearly bumping into her tray. "What happened?" she asked instinctively. "Some investors furious. Something about a deal going bad," the staffer muttered, rolling her eyes. "Rich people problems." Emma nodded, but the words lingered. A deal going bad. Sinking frustration. Tension among the wealthy. She'd always imagined their lives as perfect, insulated from the chaos she battled daily. But maybe perfection wasn't as solid as it looked from the outside. When she returned to the ballroom, she immediately noticed the shift. A few guests whispered behind their champagne flutes. A woman with glittering earrings glanced nervously toward the terrace before quickly turning away. And then Emma saw him. The man, her stranger, standing a little apart from the crowd. Phone in hand, jaw-tight brows slightly furrowed. Whatever had happened tonight, he was clearly involved. As she passed by him with her tray, she could feel something dark humming beneath his composed exterior. Frustration, maybe anger, but not the arrogant kind she'd come to expect from people like him. This felt personal, human, fragile even. For a wild second, she wanted to speak to him, not as a server, not as a stranger, but as someone who understood what it felt like for life to slip momentarily out of control. But she didn't. Of course she didn't. She kept walking, pretending she hadn't seen anything, pretending she wasn't affected by the way emotion flickered in his gaze. But then, as if fate were testing her resolve, he stepped toward her, one step smooth and unhurried, closing the distance enough that she felt his presence before she registered his movement. "Are you okay, carrying that by yourself?" he asked quietly, eyes briefly dropping to her tray before meeting her gaze again. She blinked momentarily, disoriented. Of all the things he could have asked, she wasn't expecting kindness, real, genuine concern. Her throat tightened in a way she hadn't anticipated. "I'm fine," she answered softly. The moment stretched tense, warm, fragile. She could have sworn there was something else he wanted to say. A question caught behind his eyes, but before he could speak, Patricia materialized between them like a cold gust of wind, her voice low and edged with warning. Emma stepped back, pulse racing. She couldn't afford to draw attention, especially not of the wrong kind. But his gaze followed her, softer now, almost protective, as if he sensed she'd been reprimanded, even without hearing the words. For the remainder of the night she stayed as far from him as possible, But distance didn't dissolve the connection. If anything, it made her more painfully aware of it. Every time she crossed the room, she felt his attention, his curiosity, the silent thread tying their worlds together for reasons she couldn't comprehend. And then came the moment that changed everything. Near the end of the gala, as she returned from the kitchen with a fresh tray, she overheard Patricia speaking harshly to another staff member about cutting hours for anyone who can't keep up. The threat was unmistakable. The staffer's face paled. Something inside Emma twisted. She knew what fear tasted like. She knew the desperation of depending on one shift, one paycheck, one chance. That fear lived inside her bones. For the first time that evening, her invisibility felt like a suffocating trap rather than a shield. And in that instant, she understood something with unsettling clarity. The wealthy weren't the only ones who could dictate someone else's future. Power lived in small, cruel corners too, in coordinators who controlled schedules, in bosses who exploited desperation in systems that allowed people like her to fall through cracks without safety nets. She wasn't just tired. She was exhausted by being powerless. And just when she thought she had regained control of her emotions, she looked up and saw him watching her again. His expression softer this time, almost concerned. It was ridiculous to think he could read her distress. Ridiculous to imagine he cared. But for one suspended heartbeat, their gazes held across the glittering room, and Emma felt something shift inside her. Not because of him specifically, but because the night had cracked something open in her. A truth she hadn't wanted to face. She wanted more. More than invisibility. More than survival. More than 3 jobs and a lifetime of being told her place. And she didn't know how yet, or why, or what it meant. But something in his eyes made her believe that tonight was not just a night. It was the beginning of something she didn't have a name for yet. Something she wasn't sure she was ready for. But it was happening whether she wanted it or not. And deep down beneath all the fear and uncertainty, she felt the faintest spark of something she hadn't dared to feel in years. Possibility. Emma left the penthouse long after midnight, the city breeze cold against her skin as she stepped back into the version of New York. She understood, the one that smelled like asphalt and street carts, instead of champagne and polished marble. The subway platform was mostly empty, flickering lights, casting long shadows that wavered with every passing train. She held the envelope of cash they'd handed her at the end of the shift, with both hands gripping it, as though it might vanish if she stopped reminding herself it was real. $300. Survival money. But her mind wasn't on the cash. It kept circling back to him, the stranger with the blue eyes who had watched her like she wasn't invisible, wasn't forgettable, wasn't just another moving part in the machinery of the event. She tried to tell herself it meant nothing. People looked at people. Eyes wandered. Curiosity was not destiny. But the truth pressed against her ribs, harder than she wanted to admit. It had been a long time since anyone saw her without looking through her. And she wasn't sure how to feel about it. Back home, while the apartment slept, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment until emotion tangled with exhaustion and eventually pulled her into a restless sleep. By morning, she had convinced herself the feeling would fade. She had bills to pay, shifts to survive, classes to finish. She didn't have time for strange men with intense eyes and complicated lives. So she tried to bury the memory, but the universe refused to let her. It started 3 days later during her shift at the cafe. She was at the espresso machine, coaxing it to behave, when her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She ignored it at first. Marcus hated distractions, but during a lull she checked the screen. A number she didn't know. A message that made her pulse jolt. "Emma, this is Miles Carter. Madison gave me your number." For a moment she couldn't breathe. She knew the name. She had heard snippets from guests at the gala hints about a family empire, whispers about one of the most influential men in New York. And she understood instantly why he'd seemed so different, why his presence had felt like gravity. Her first instinct was panic. Her second was disbelief. Her third, a quiet, unwelcome thrill that trickled warmth down her spine. She told herself to ignore it, delete it, pretend it never happened. But her fingers betrayed her, typing a polite response, each word heavy with caution. When he invited her to meet him the next day, she agreed before she could stop herself. And just like that, the thread connecting their worlds tightened. The next afternoon, she found herself sitting in a small cafe on the Upper West Side, a place far too elegant for her budget, chasing her nerves with sips of overpriced black coffee. She told herself she shouldn't have come. She told herself she was being naive. But when Miles walked in, wearing jeans and a casual shirt that still somehow looked expensive, every warning bell in her mind softened beneath a quiet, disarming warmth. He approached her with a kind of sincerity she didn't expect from men with generational wealth. His smile wasn't practiced. It was real, if a bit hesitant, like he was afraid of startling her. And his eyes, God, those eyes, held something unfamiliar. Not arrogance, not pity, but interest. Genuine, focused interest. They talked. She tried to keep the conversation polite and distant, but it kept slipping into something deeper, like water finding cracks in stone. He asked about her classes, her dreams, the 3 jobs she worked. But he asked with a softness that made her feel braver than she was. And when she spoke, he listened, as if each word mattered. She wasn't used to that. It disarmed her more than his wealth, more than his presence, more than the tug she felt whenever he looked at her too long. Yet even in the warmth of their conversation, a cold thread of fear wound through her chest. Because as much as she liked talking to him, she kept thinking, this isn't my world. And she could see in small ways that it wasn't his either. His eyes dimmed when he spoke about obligations, about the life he was expected to live, about choices that weren't choices at all. She recognized loneliness when she heard it. When he mentioned wanting to build something meaningful, housing, community, stability, she saw the light return to his gaze. And when he confessed no one in his circle understood why he cared about such things, Emma felt something inside her shift. It wasn't romance. Not yet. It was something more dangerous: connection. They talked until her break stretched too long, until time blurred into a feeling neither of them wanted to interrupt. And when she finally stood to leave, he paused as if he wanted to say something more, but didn't know how. She didn't know how to respond either. So they parted with quiet awkwardness that somehow felt more intimate than any goodbye she'd had in years. She left the cafe with her chest full and her mind scattered. Something had begun. Something she wasn't ready for. Something she didn't understand. She tried to bury it again. She tried to tell herself meeting him once didn't mean anything. But she couldn't erase the memory of his eyes searching her face, or the way her name sounded when he said it, tentative, careful, almost protective. She didn't want to want any of that. Wanting was dangerous. Wanting made people reckless. And yet recklessness was exactly what crept up on her days later during her evening class. The professor was lecturing about market strategy, but Emma couldn't concentrate. Her notebook filled with scribbles that started as numbers and ended as thoughts she didn't dare say aloud. Why me? What is he looking for? What does he see when he looks at me? She slammed the notebook shut, anger rising unexpectedly, not at him, at herself, because she could feel it happening, the shift inside her, the wanting, the curiosity, the fear that she might be stepping towards something she couldn't control. She finished class and walked outside into the cool night air, hoping it would clear her mind. Instead, it tangled her thoughts further. She started home drowning in her own overthinking until a black SUV pulled up near her. Her heart jumped fear first instinctively, but the window rolled down, and she exhaled when she recognized the face behind the glass. Miles wasn't smiling. His expression was tense, unreadable. "Emma," he said softly, as if afraid to startle her. "I didn't mean to scare you. I saw your class ended and I—" She interrupted quickly. "How did you know where I was?" He looked momentarily caught. "You told me last time. You mentioned you had classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I guess the timing." She wasn't sure whether to believe him, but his voice didn't carry deceit. Only concern. And something else she couldn't name. He stepped out of the car before she could refuse, hands in his pockets. Posture almost shy. Not what she expected from a man whose family name probably opened every door in the city. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. The question was simple, but it tore through her carefully constructed defenses. No one asked her that, and meant it. Not really. Not sincerely. She nodded too quickly, trying to bury the sudden ache in her chest. He saw through it. "You seem far away," he murmured. "I didn't want to bother you, but I thought maybe you shouldn't walk home alone this late." The words were innocent, but the way he looked at her wasn't. It wasn't romantic. Not quite. It wasn't desire. Not yet. It was recognition. Like he understood she carried the weight of a life he couldn't imagine, and he wanted, without knowing, how to ease even a small piece of it. That scared her more than anything. So she stepped back, keeping her distance. "I'm fine," she said gently. "I've done this walk 1,000 times." He exhaled slowly, disappointment flickering across his features before he masked it. "Of course. I didn't mean to overstep." And yet, even as he backed away, his eyes lingered, searching her face, as if memorizing something he didn't want to lose. That look felt like a soft blow to her ribs, because she understood then that this man, this impossibly out-of-reach man, wasn't just a stranger anymore. He had stepped intentionally or not into the quiet spaces of her life, and she didn't know what to do with that. When he left, she stood alone under the street lamp, heart trembling with an emotion that was not quite fear and not quite hope, something in between, sharp and unsteady. She walked home with that feeling clinging to her like perfume she hadn't meant to wear. And by the time she reached her apartment, a truth she didn't want to face had settled beneath her skin. Her world was shifting. His world had begun to pull at hers, and she was standing on the edge of something she could no longer pretend she didn't feel. Something she wasn't sure she could stop, even if she wanted to. Emma spent the next several days failing to restore the rhythm of her life. She worked her shifts with mechanical precision, smiled at customers, took notes in class, forced herself through chapters of textbooks, even when the words blurred into nonsense. But something had unsettled her ever since that night outside the classroom, when Miles stood under the street lamp, not asking for anything, just looking at her, like he could see the exhaustion she hid from everyone else. She kept replaying that moment on her walk home, telling herself the tremor she felt was simply nerves or caution, or the unsteady thrill of danger. She didn't want to call it anything else. The more she tried to bury the spark between them, the more it surfaced in unexpected places, when she wiped down tables at the cafe, when she sorted receipts at the restaurant, when she fought to stay awake during lectures. It wasn't him she thought about. Not exactly. It was the look in his eyes, the way he said her name, like it wasn't just another sound, but something he was trying to understand. She didn't know if she wanted that. She didn't know if she could afford wanting anything more than survival. But something was happening anyway, creeping in slowly until she couldn't ignore it anymore. And it terrified her. On Thursday afternoon, as she was hurrying between her coffee shop shift and her night class, her phone buzzed again. A message she tried not to hope for. "Are you free tomorrow? I'd like to see you." She froze on the sidewalk, people brushing past her like waves around a lone rock. She should say no. She should protect herself. She should keep distance between her world and his. But her fingers moved before her reasoning could catch up. When the answer came fast, as if he'd been waiting for her reply. "Whenever you're done with work." She stared at the message for a long moment, the city humming around her, and felt her defenses crack just a little. She typed back, "Fine." The following evening, she met him in a quiet cafe near Central Park, a place dimly lit and warm with amber light. The kind of place where conversations softened into something intimate, even without meaning to. He was already there when she arrived, sitting at a small corner table, and the way his face brightened slightly when he saw her sent a flutter through her chest she wished she could ignore. He didn't treat her like someone who was doing him a favor by showing up. He treated her like someone he genuinely wanted to see, and that made it worse. Because if she wasn't careful, she would start wanting it too. They talked again, easily, naturally, until time blurred. Yet beneath the flow of conversation, beneath the warm flicker of candles, and the low murmur of other patrons, there was something heavier in Miles tonight. A tension subtle but present, pulling at the edges of his composure. She noticed it in the way he occasionally tapped his finger against his cup, in the way his gaze drifted before returning to her, as if wrestling with thoughts he couldn't fully voice. "Is something wrong?" She finally asked, her voice quieter than intended. The question seemed to catch him off guard. He hesitated, the flicker of vulnerability crossing his features so briefly, she wondered if she imagined it. "It's nothing you need to worry about," he said softly. But she did worry. She wasn't sure why or what right she had to, but something about the way he said it, gentle, almost apologetic, hurt, in a place she didn't know was open. Before she could respond, his phone vibrated on the table. The name flashing on the screen made his jaw tighten ever so slightly. She didn't know who it was, but the tension rippling across his expression made her chest constrict. He let it ring until it stopped, then faced her again with a strained smile. She didn't comment, but inside, a knot formed. Whoever had called him possessed a kind of power over him she didn't understand yet, and it made her realize with discomfort that she knew almost nothing about his real world. She had seen only fragments, the loneliness between the lines, the yearning to be someone his family wouldn't allow, the exhaustion beneath his polished surface. But she hadn't seen the forces shaping him. Not the expectations, not the responsibilities he hinted at, but never described. Not the people who demanded pieces of him. That uncertainty pressed into her ribs. Could someone like him truly exist outside the world he was born into? Could she? Could they even talk without gravity tugging in different directions? She tried to shake it off, but the feeling followed her into the night as they left the cafe and walked along the edge of Central Park. The city lights shimmered against the leaves overhead, and their footsteps fell quietly on the pavement. He walked close enough that she could sense the warmth of him, but not close enough to touch. It felt intentional, respectful, and frustrating in ways she didn't want to think about. "I'm glad you came," he said after a long pause. She didn't answer right away. Her heartbeat was too loud in her ears. Only when they approached the subway entrance did she finally breathe out. "I don't know what this is, Miles, or what you want." Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. He stopped walking. The crowd flowed around them like a river split by a single stone. He looked at her with a quiet intensity that made her chest tighten. "I'm not sure yet," he admitted, "but I know I want to understand it. And I know I want to understand you." The sincerity in his voice unraveled something in her. Something she had spent years burying beneath exhaustion and practicality. It scared her because she didn't know how to hold something that wasn't survival. Wanting him felt like standing at the edge of a cliff in the dark, dangerous, exhilarating, impossible to predict. "You shouldn't," she whispered. "I'm not." She didn't know how to finish. Not safe, not wealthy, not someone who fit neatly into a life like his. He stepped closer, not enough to touch, but enough to let her feel the gravity of him. "You don't have to be anything but yourself." The words were simple, but they hit her harder than she expected. Her chest ached with something she didn't have a name for yet. Before she could respond, someone called out from down the block, a firm, familiar voice that made Miles flinch almost imperceptibly. Emma turned to see a tall woman approaching, dressed in sharp winter gray, her expression composed, yet cutting the kind of face shaped by years of wealth and expectation. Miles's posture stiffened instantly. Emma didn't need an introduction. She knew instinctively this was someone from his world, and she could tell by the similar jawline, the cool blue eyes, the effortless authority. This was family. The woman stopped a few steps away, gaze sweeping over Emma with an evaluation so brief yet so dismissive, it made Emma's stomach twist. Not cruel, not insulting, just erasing. "Miles," the woman said, her voice low, but edged with impatience. "We need to talk." He inhaled slowly, tension rippling through his shoulders. "Not right now. It's important." Her gaze flicked to Emma again, colder this time, like she was reconsidering something she'd already judged. And in that look, sharp, appraising, dangerous, Emma felt the world she didn't belong to close ranks around her. Miles turned back to Emma, apology flickering across his features, but beneath it, a plea she couldn't decipher. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I have to." She nodded quickly, stepping away before he could finish. "Go." She didn't wait for his response. She didn't want to see the conflict tightening his jaw or the frustration shadowing his eyes. She hurried down the subway steps, her heart pounding, her breath shaking, the echo of the woman's cold stare burning beneath her skin. Only once she was swallowed by the underground did she let herself feel the truth gathering like a storm inside her. Whatever this was between them, it wasn't just fragile. It wasn't just complicated. It was impossible. And yet somewhere deep beneath her fear, another truth flickered, stubborn and unwelcome. She didn't want to walk away. Not yet. Not from him. Not from whatever was beginning to rise between their two breaking worlds. For the next 2 days, Emma moved through her life with the strange sensation that something invisible was tugging at her, as if small threads from another world had wrapped themselves around her wrists and were slowly pulling her off balance. She tried to ignore it, to pretend nothing had shifted after the encounter with the woman who looked at her like an equation that didn't add up, but the unease lingered beneath her ribs. She kept replaying the moment at the subway entrance, the tension in Miles's voice, his mother's cold stare, the distance that snapped between them the second that woman arrived. Emma told herself it was stupid to care. She barely knew him. She had no claim to anything in his life. Yet something in her felt bruised, as if a door had closed before she even realized she wanted it open. She buried herself in work, hoping exhaustion would drown the thoughts. But at the cafe on Monday morning, while she was wiping down the counter before the rush, a sleek black envelope was placed quietly beside her hand. She looked up, startled, expecting a customer, but there was no one. Only the door swinging shut. She picked up the envelope, feeling her stomach drop at the weight of it figuratively, even before she opened it. Inside was a single cream-colored card embossed with gold script. A name she recognized instantly: Eliza Carter. And beneath it, an address. A request to meet. No time, no explanation. Just a place. It unnerved her. Everything about it felt like a warning disguised as an invitation. She should ignore it. She should throw it away. Instead, she found herself staring at it, pulse tightening as if the card itself whispered a truth she didn't want to hear. This isn't optional. The unease stayed with her through her shifts and into the late afternoon as she took the train to Midtown, fighting the instinct to turn back at every stop. But the moment she stepped off the elevator into the lobby of a luxury building she'd never imagined entering on her own, something cold settled over her, an instinctive awareness that she was walking into enemy territory. A doorman led her to a private lounge, its quiet elegance suffocating in its perfection. Eliza Carter stood near the window framed by the skyline behind her. The setting sun cast a warm glow across the room, but nothing in her expression reflected that warmth. She turned when she heard Emma approach, eyes sharp, calculating. The kind of gaze that weighed value rather than humanity. "Thank you for coming," Eliza said, in a tone that sounded polite, but felt like command. Emma stood straighter, refusing to shrink even as anxiety prickled across her skin. "You didn't leave much room to decline." Eliza's lips twitched, not exactly a smile. Practicality is a virtue. She gestured to a small seating area. Emma sat because she didn't want to give Eliza the satisfaction of looking uncertain. "What do you need from me?" she asked quietly. Eliza studied her the way someone might examine a piece of fragile glass, curiously, critically, but with the knowledge it could be shattered with little effort. "I'll be direct," she said. "My son is vulnerable to illusions of escape, temporary distractions, romantic fantasies." Emma felt heat rise in her throat, a mix of defensiveness and indignation. But she kept her face still. "If this is about—" "It is," Eliza cut in. "Whatever is happening between you and Miles, I assure you it will not lead anywhere lasting." Foreign anger flickered beneath Emma's ribs, quiet but strong. "You don't know me. I know enough." Eliza's voice stayed calm, but the edges sharpened. "You're ambitious, hardworking, intelligent, and you live in a world where money, stability, opportunity are incredibly rare. So I understand the temptation." "Truly." Emma's jaw clenched. "This isn't a temptation." "Of course it is," Eliza replied softly, almost pitying. "You may not call it that, but that's what it will become." She reached into her structured handbag and placed an envelope onto the table between them, sliding it with manicured precision until it rested directly in front of Emma. It looked dangerously familiar. $50,000, Eliza said. "Enough to finish your degree. Enough to give your mother a comfortable life. Enough to step out of survival mode long enough to breathe. Enough to not need a man like my son to feel secure." Something inside Emma recoiled, not from the offer, but from the implication. The dismissal, the arrogance, the quiet cruelty of someone who believed she understood Emma's entire life from the outside. And in return, Emma asked, though she already knew. Eliza tapped one manicured finger against the envelope. "You walk away." Emma exhaled slowly, the air thick in her lungs. She should have expected this. She should have known the moment her path crossed with someone like Miles, that the people orbiting him wouldn't let that connection happen without consequences. But knowing it and sitting in front of it were two very different things. She lifted her chin. "Do you think so little of your son that you believe he'd be fooled by money into thinking I never cared?" Eliza's expression didn't change. "This isn't about care. It's about reality. Miles was raised in a world governed by expectations, by alliances, reputations, legacies. He will not abandon that life, even if he tries to." Emma felt that truth like a stone dropping inside her. Because a part of her feared it too. Feared that no matter how sincere Miles seemed, the world he lived in would always be stronger than whatever existed between them. Eliza continued, her tone smooth as silk and cold as ice. You are a phase, Miss Matthews. You represent freedom, novelty, a slice of authenticity he is unaccustomed to. But phases pass. Reality does not. Something in Emma hardened. And if I say no, then you will discover, Eliza said softly, how small this city can become when powerful doors quietly close. The threat wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Emma felt it in her bones, the way you feel a shift in weather before a storm breaks. Eliza leaned back, unbothered, certain of her control. You have potential, she continued. Why waste it on chasing something that was never designed to last? Emma stood, her legs steady, despite the turmoil inside her. Maybe it wasn't designed to last, but that's not your choice. Eliza tilted her head. And is it yours? Emma didn't answer. She couldn't not, with her pulse pounding, not with the suffocating awareness that every fear she'd tried to bury had been dragged into the light. She walked out without touching the envelope, though she felt its weight as though it clung to her palms. The air outside was cold, cutting through her coat and settling deep into her chest. She walked without direction, her thoughts unraveling with each step. She knew Miles cared. She felt it in his voice, in his eyes, in the quiet gentleness he carried only around her. But feelings were small things compared to the machinery of the elite world he came from. Feeling didn't change power. Feeling didn't erase the difference between their lives. Feeling didn't guarantee survival. She arrived at her apartment long after dark, too drained to speak to her roommates, too hollow to pretend everything was fine. She sank onto her bed, the silence heavy. She didn't cry, not at first. The tears came only when she whispered something she'd never admitted until now. I think I'm falling for him. And the confession hurt. Because falling for someone who lived in a world that could break her with a single elegant gesture felt like walking willingly into fire. But the deeper truth, the one she tried to push down, rose anyway. She wasn't sure she wanted to walk away, even if it destroyed her, even if she already felt the edges of her heart beginning to burn. Ida ga kuafong nye zazu. Emma. It was Madison. You okay? Emma wiped her face quickly. Yeah, but her voice shook. Madison hesitated outside the door, but didn't enter. If you need anything, I'm here. After the hallway fell silent again, Emma curled into herself and whispered the truth she feared most. She was falling for a man whose world had already decided she didn't belong. And the worst part, she didn't know if she was strong enough to let go, or brave enough to hold on. The night stretched around her heavy and uncertain, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting to see which path she would choose. The one that protected her life, or the one that could change it forever. Emma woke the next morning with the tired heaviness of someone who hadn't truly slept, her thoughts still tangled where she'd left them the night before. The memory of Eliza Carter's voice lodged behind her ribs like a shard of glass, sharp enough to sting whenever she breathed too deeply. She moved through her morning shift like a ghost, drifting through routines that felt suddenly foreign, as if her body were performing them out of habit, while her mind floated somewhere far above the noise. The world around her hadn't changed. Same coffee stains on the countertop. Same customers impatient for caffeine. Same hum of street traffic seeping through the cafe windows. But she had. Or maybe the change had already begun long before last night, and now she was finally seeing it. Around noon, while wiping down the machines, she checked her phone out of instinct. A message from Miles was waiting. Are you free tonight? I'd like to see you. I've been worried. Her breath snagged. She wasn't ready, not to lie, not to tell the truth, not to share the weight sitting inside her like a stone. She typed, "We can talk later," then deleted it. She tried, "I'm fine," but erased that too. Eventually, she shoved the phone back into her apron, unable to face the complexity of what he deserved to know. At her second job, she tried to distract herself with trays and orders and forced smiles, but every time her mind drifted, she saw Eliza's envelope sitting untouched on the table between them. She heard the warning hidden beneath polished courtesy. "My son is vulnerable. Illusions of escape. You are a phase." That last part replayed the loudest, not because she believed it, but because she feared that maybe, just maybe, Miles did. Or would. Deep down, she knew what terrified her most wasn't losing him. It was losing herself to a world that had already decided she wasn't enough. By the time her night shift ended, exhaustion tugged at her bones. She stepped outside into the cool air, inhaling deeply, hoping the city's familiar grit would anchor her. Instead, the first thing she saw was the black SUV idling across the street. Her pulse jumped, a mix of fear and hope tightening her chest. Only one person in her life showed up in cars like that. The back door opened, and Miles stepped out. Not polished tonight, not poised. He looked like he hadn't slept either. Hair, slightly disheveled shirt, untucked, tension written across every angle of him. He crossed the street quickly, relief washing into his expression the moment his eyes met hers. "Emma," he breathed, as if just seeing her eased something in him. She froze, unable to move, because the distance between them suddenly felt crowded with everything she hadn't said. He stopped an arm's length from her, searching her face with a worry that pierced her chest. "You've been distant," he said quietly. "I didn't want to push, but something's wrong. Tell me what's happening." She looked away, heat clawing at the back of her throat. "It's nothing." "Emma." He stepped closer, voice soft but unwavering. "Please don't shut me out." She swallowed hard. She wanted to collapse into him, to let his presence soften the ache she carried. But if she let her defenses fall now, she didn't know if she'd recover. "I can't do this right now," she whispered. "I'm tired." He didn't touch her, didn't reach for her. He just stood there, a quiet warmth in the cold. "Then let me walk you home," he said gently. She shook her head. "No, I need space." That hurt him. She saw it in the flicker of pain tightening his jaw. But he nodded slowly, breathing in through his nose like he was trying to steady something inside himself. "Okay," he said, "if that's what you need." She turned away, took a few steps, then stopped, because her heart felt like it was splitting between impulse and fear. She wanted to turn back. She wanted him to follow. But she also needed to breathe without feeling the weight of expectation closing in. She kept walking. She didn't look back. That night, she didn't sleep again. The apartment too quiet, her mind too loud. By morning, she hadn't answered any of his messages. She barely ate. She drifted through the day in a haze, alternating between moments of clarity and abrupt waves of panic that left her breathless. By early evening, she finally checked her phone again. There were 7 messages from Miles, all gentle, all worried. The most recent one said, "Please let me know you're okay. I'm not asking for answers, just that you're safe." Something inside her cracked. He didn't deserve silence. He didn't deserve punishment for something he didn't do. She typed a short reply. "Let's talk." Within minutes, another message came. "Tell me where." She hesitated, then sent the address of a quiet park near her apartment. Not crowded, not fancy, just neutral ground somewhere she could breathe. When she arrived, he was already there, standing beneath a street lamp, hands in his pockets, shoulders tight. The moment he saw her, the tension in his eyes shifted into something heartbreakingly soft. She tried to speak, but the words tangled. He stepped closer, giving her enough space to run if she needed. "Emma," he said, voice low. "Please don't be afraid of me." She shook her head quickly. "I'm not." "Then what is it?" She wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the pavement. "Your world," she finally whispered. "It's too much." He exhaled slowly. "Is this because of—" She cut him off, not wanting to hear his mother's name. "It's because I don't want to be someone who ruins your life." His brow furrowed, pain flashing through his eyes. "You're not ruining anything. You don't know that," she said, voice trembling. "You don't see what I see. How people look at me. How they look at us. I don't care about what people think. But they do." She shot back the words harsher than intended. "And they're part of your life. They're part of your world. And I'm—" Her voice broke. "I'm not." He stepped closer, desperation creeping into his expression. "Emma, please look at me." When she didn't, he gently lifted her chin, not forcing, just guiding. "You matter to me," he said, each word deliberate, fragile, real. "What I feel for you is not temporary. It's not a distraction. It's not a phase." Her eyes stung. "Your mother thinks it is." His jaw tightened. "My mother doesn't decide my life, but she can destroy mine," Emma whispered. That stopped him, completely. He swallowed hard, the truth of her words sinking into him like a weight he hadn't realized was there. A long silence stretched between them, thick with things neither wanted to admit. Finally, he reached for her hand, not grabbing, not pulling, just offering. "Then let me protect you," he said softly. "Let me stand between you and anything that tries to hurt you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't want protection," she whispered. "I want peace." He gently wiped a tear with his thumb, his voice almost breaking. "I want to give you that too." She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his touch anchor her. For a moment she allowed herself to lean into it, to feel the comfort his presence gave her, to imagine what life could be if love were the only thing that mattered. But reality pressed back ruthlessly. She stepped away, breaking the contact. His face fell. "Emma, I need time," she said, voice shaking, but steadier than she expected. "Time to think. Time to breathe. Time to figure out who I am in all of this." He looked shattered, but nodded slowly, respecting what she asked, even though it was clearly tearing him apart. "I'll wait," he whispered, "as long as you need." She believed him, and that was what frightened her most, because the deeper he fell, the deeper she was falling with him, and both of their worlds were waiting, knives drawn, ready to cut the moment they touched the ground. They stood there in silence, the park lit only by the soft amber glow of the lamp above them. Two silhouettes caught between wanting and fear. Then she turned and walked away, her chest hollow, her heart splitting open in the quiet. And he didn't follow because he understood, because he loved her enough not to chase. Emma didn't know if she'd made the right choice, but as she walked home with tears cooling on her cheeks, she realized something with painful clarity. She wasn't pushing him away because she didn't want him. She was pushing him away because she wanted him so much it hurt. And wanting him might destroy her. But not wanting him would destroy her too. And somewhere between those two impossible truths, her heart braced for the moment everything would finally break. For days after their conversation in the quiet park, Emma drifted through her life with the strange sensation that she was floating in the space between two worlds, one she belonged to and one she never would, never. The silence she had placed between herself and Miles felt like an invisible bruise she kept pressing by accident, each memory of him throbbing with a mix of comfort and pain. She worked, slept in fragments, studied without absorbing anything, The girls at the apartment tiptoed around her as though she were made of glass. Madison knocked twice a night, pretending she needed laundry detergent or scissors just to check she was still breathing. Emma pretended she was fine, because pretending was easier than admitting she had no idea how to navigate the fragile line between love and self-protection. The truth was simple and unbearable. She missed him. Not the version of him with effortless charm or inherited power, but the man who looked at her like she mattered, who listened with his whole attention, who carried a loneliness so similar to hers that it terrified her how deeply she recognized it. She told herself distance was necessary. She needed to survive her own future before she could be part of anyone else's. But every night she lay awake replaying his voice, soft, steady breaking at the edges, when he said he would wait for her, and the silence she'd offered him in return felt like a wound she had inflicted on them both. On Thursday evening after her cafe shift, she finally checked her phone again. Dozens of unread messages flashed across the screen. Professors, classmates, spam. But her eyes went straight to his name. Only one message from him that day. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you're not alone. No pressure, no pleading, just care. It was enough to break the fragile resolve she'd tried so hard to build. She closed her eyes, inhaled slowly, and for the first time in days, allowed herself to ask the question she had been avoiding. What was she protecting herself from the world around them, or the possibility that she might actually deserve him? The answer startled her. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of believing she was worthy of something good, something gentle, something like love. The realization left her frozen for a moment, before a quiet, stubborn warmth began to rise from somewhere deep inside her. Maybe she didn't know what their future looked like. Maybe it would be messy, unbalanced, carved with every kind of challenge. But she also knew that what she felt for him wasn't something she could tuck away like a forgotten chapter. It lived too loudly inside her now. And she wasn't sure she wanted silence anymore. She needed clarity, not from him, but from herself. She decided she would talk to him, not tonight, but soon. She walked home with a strange steadiness, as though making even a small decision had given her back a piece of herself. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, rehearsing what she might say to him, how she might explain the fear and the longing threading through her. She unlocked the door and froze. Her roommates were sitting at the small kitchen table. Madison's expression was pale in a way Emma had never seen before, and Jessica was holding a phone to her chest like it burned. Both of them looked up in unison when Emma entered, and something in their faces made Emma's stomach drop. Emma, Madison whispered, "You need to sit." "What happened?" Emma asked, her voice already trembling. Madison swallowed hard. "You're not going to like this." Jessica exhaled shakily as she set her phone on the table. "Just listen." She pressed play. At first there was only faint background noise, rustling footsteps, a low hum. Then a voice. A woman's. Cool, sharp, unmistakable. Eliza Carter. Emma felt her pulse stop. She's young, impressionable. She'll step back eventually, girls like her always do, once they realize reality won't bend for love. Emma gripped the back of a chair, breath caught in her throat. Madison mouthed, "I'm sorry," but Emma couldn't look away from the phone. Another voice joined the recording, a man's, older, authoritative. She didn't know him, but his tone felt heavy with entitlement. "And if she doesn't?" Eliza responded with a quiet certainty that made Emma's skin crawl. "She will. Pressures do what they're meant to. Besides, Miles will outgrow her. He always outgrows his phases." Emma felt her knees weaken. She forced herself to keep listening, even as something inside her curled into itself. "We've survived scandals before," the man continued. "But if this becomes public," Eliza cut him off. "It won't. She doesn't belong in his life. She knows that. And if she doesn't yet, she will soon." The recording ended. Silence collapsed over the kitchen, thick and suffocating. Emma stood motionless, her heart pounding so hard it felt as though it might tear through her chest. Madison rose and reached for her shoulder, but Emma flinched back, unable to bear being touched, while the words still echoed inside her like knives. Girls like her, phases, doesn't belong. Emma's throat closed. Where did this come from? Jessica hesitated. A friend. Someone who works near their family. They overheard it. Overheard Emma whispered and recorded. Why? Because they knew it was about you, Madison said softly, and they thought you deserved to know. Emma stared at the wall, her breath shaky, her vision blurring. All the fears she'd tried to bury rose like shadows around her. She had known from the beginning that his world was dangerous in ways hers wasn't prepared for. But hearing it confirmed out loud without apology was different. It wasn't fear piercing through her now. It was humiliation. A humiliation so deep it felt physical. I need air, she murmured. Before either of them could respond, she slipped out of the apartment, down the stairs, and onto the dimly lit sidewalk. The city buzzed around her, but felt muffled, distant, like she'd stepped into the shell of her own body. She walked aimlessly, the cold biting her cheeks, her lungs burning with every inhale. She didn't stop until she reached the small playground a few blocks away, empty except for a single street lamp casting pale light over the swings. She sat on one, gripping the icy chains, trying to steady herself against the tremble in her chest. Tears finally spilled, quiet, uncontrollable, the kind that came from a wound too deep for words. She didn't hear footsteps approaching until a familiar voice broke through the night. Emma. Her breath caught. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. She knew him instantly. He moved closer, stopping a step away, his shadow merging with hers on the pavement. I've been worried, he said softly. You weren't answering, Madison said. He stopped, seeing her face. Concern washed over his expression like a storm. What happened? She shook her head, swallowing the ache. She didn't want him to see her like this. She didn't want to be another fragile thing in his life that needed protecting. She wanted strength. She wanted truth, but truth hurt too much. Emma, he whispered, voice cracking. Please talk to me. She forced herself to meet his eyes, even as her heart screamed in protest. Did you know? His brows drew together. Know what? She tried to steady her breathing. About what your mother said. About what your family thinks of me. His confusion hardened into anger, not at her, but at something he recognized in her tone. What did she do? Emma didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone, pressing play on the recording before she lost her nerve. His face changed fast. Shock, fury, disbelief. Then something deeper, more wounded. When the recording ended, he looked shattered, almost sick. Emma, he whispered, stepping forward. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But the pain was too raw. It doesn't matter, she said, her voice trembling. It's true, isn't it? I don't belong in your life. No, he said, fierce and sudden. That's her world talking, not mine. But you live in that world. I don't want to, he said, chest heaving. I want. He cut himself off, running a hand through his hair in agitation. I want you. Her breath hitched. Miles, I'm done letting them decide who I am, he said, stepping closer, voice low and trembling. I'm done letting them cage me, and I'm sure as hell done letting them hurt you. His sincerity nearly broke her. Her heart pulled toward him instinctively, the way it always did, but fear held her in place. This is too big, she whispered. We're too different. And your family. My family is not my future, he said with a steadiness she hadn't seen in him before. You are. She felt the words hit her like a warm gust in winter, thawing something inside her that had frozen long before he arrived. She didn't answer, not with words, but when he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. Not this time. Her fingers trembled as they slid into his, but once they did, a quiet calm settled into her bones, unexpected and overwhelming. They stood there beneath the street lamp, two silhouettes holding on to something fragile yet impossibly strong, something that had survived fear-distance threats and wounds inflicted by worlds meant to keep them apart. Love wasn't a promise. It wasn't a shield. It wasn't a guarantee of forever. But in that moment, it was a choice. And Emma realized she was ready finally bravely to choose it. No matter how chaotic, no matter how uncertain, no matter how much the world pushed back. She looked up at him through tear-blurred lashes. I'm still scared, she whispered. He lifted her hand to his lips, his voice breaking. Then let's be scared together. And as he pulled her into his arms, the city around them continued moving, unaware that in the small, quiet corner of a cold New York night, two lives had just shifted onto a new path, one they would walk not as two strangers from separate worlds, but as two hearts learning slowly and fiercely to build one. The end.